2022, I think it was, Dr. Gavin Ortlund put out a video saying icon veneration is clearly in the creation, and then there's like 5,000 responses to it, and then like rebuttals on rebuttals. Up until that point, I had actually never cared too much about Nicaea II. For me, when I joined the church, it was not an issue for me. The logic behind it made sense. I did do a deep dive then into it because I could see that this was a real issue for a lot of people and that this caused a lot of problems for a lot of people. And so I was trying to listen to Dr. Ortlund, but also the commenters and what they were struggling with. And so now that I have a YouTube channel, I thought I would share my thoughts on that. So I'm going to just give a really brief overview of where I landed on icon veneration after kind of looking at some of the newer information I was getting from the Protestant side and just kind of sifting it out, because I do think they made some good points that I needed to kind of integrate into my current body of knowledge. So my own perspective is I do not think that icon veneration was a practice of the early church in the first, 300, 400 years. I do think that the practice likely developed. I'm going to give it like a 70% chance if I have to give it a number. Like that icon veneration was not a practice of the early church. And the reason I leave the 30 is because I think that leaves a real chance that it was, because there are certain things that we don't have in the historical record that we just simply do not have to really make the full judgment of that. And so I think it leaves open the possibility of a real chance it was, while also being, we can pretty much assume that it wasn't at this point, that we have enough data that it probably was not a practice. However, I think that in those years, what we're seeing out of, the things that Dr. Ortlund put in his original video, what they're very clearly connecting the practice to is paganism. And at this time, there's a huge historical moment against paganism, right? In Catholic theology, practice is always connected to the underlying motivator for that thing, right? We never just look at the externals. We always look at what's driving it. Okay, so I think at this time period, the same time when they were not celebrating Christmas, they didn't have church buildings because they didn't want to be associated with the pagan temple, or they didn't do birthday celebrations or wedding celebrations because those were pagan things, right? There's this huge moment where they are actively choosing the logos and then putting that in conversation with the personal God of the Jewish people, right? So they're saying these are the same. The one true God of Abraham is the one true God of Greek philosophy. Before I get too far, one of the things I do have an issue with, or not an issue that I just like to point out, is that Dr. Ortlund uses a lot of different people, but he relies a lot on Origen, who has bad Christology. Like, I'm okay using Origen sometimes. I think he's important voice of that time period, but also neither is he got all of his ducks in a row theologically. So to rely heavily on him for this specifically, because icon veneration is very, very much connected to Christology, I would not use Origen specifically because his theology undergirding this is bad, right? He's kind of Platonist. So I wouldn't use him. And if you do, I think you can't just take his conclusions if you don't agree with the premises. And I think that's exactly what is happening here in this circumstance. So moving forward, though, I do see icon veneration as a practice is found to be as a sort of cultural expression of some underlying theology. The practice itself is not connected to paganism. Now it's actually connected to authentic Christology. The underlying theology is fine. Honestly, I think if you have an issue with it, it's likely due to veneration of the saints in general, and probably not specifically icon, unless you literally have no pictures of anyone, that you don't post birthday pictures of your kids or of your mom or Mother's Day. Like, if you've literally never done that, then I applaud you for your consistency. But if you do that, I think that the underlying reasoning why this is okay would be fine, right? What you likely have an issue with, if you're still not on board, is that the saints can hear your prayers by God's power. So I think actually the main point of the argument against the Catholic Church is not so much against veneration, And that's a separate issue from what the Protestants are addressing here. I think what they're addressing is this is more an argument against the infallibility of the church than it is about saint veneration. I'm going to leave saint veneration off the table for this video and just address the consistency in church teaching, and specifically anathemas as driving that home. So after kind of the age of paganism, when that kind of died out and then Christianity became the dominant religion in the Roman Empire, we start to see a resurfacing of the practice. And the underlying theology is likely also developing to a certain extent here as well, in part because there are different circumstances, right? More saints have died. So what happens? So after icon veneration becomes more popular within Christianity, it emerges from the Christian context outside of paganism in its own context. And I don't have an issue with that because the practice here is connected to the theology. So then Emperor Leo III and Constantine V start to blame the military failures or these natural disasters on the use of icons. And so it's somewhat superstitious, right? But what's important here to realize is that the state is the one that is imposing on the church a theological position. And they're doing it in part, at least, because of state reasons. Right? It's sort of superstitious. So under Nicaea II, icon veneration is then restored. They point to it as being a historical apostolic practice. Again, it's connected to practice, but remember in Catholic theology, practice is not just about externals ever. It's always about what is driving the expression. Why are you doing this? What's the theological reasoning? And because I already said, I don't think that there was a practice apostolically, what's important here is that the church does not claim infallibility in historical matters. So whether it as a practice is not truly apostolic, what's important is the theology correct, right? Because the practice comes out of the theology. And so what we have to know here is that they could have gotten that wrong. That's not what we have infallibility about. What the Catholic Church says it has infallibility about is matters of faith and morals, not historical practice. Then the anathemas, remember, they're saying that they will be condemned on the day of our Lord. Always has to be taken in context is that there is a day of judgment on the day of our Lord that does the judging, right? They're speaking to the objective, the grave matter. This is how the church always has read this. Protestants have their own interpretation of what is meant or what is not meant. But if you're criticizing Catholicism, they also have their own interpretation of what is being said, of anathemas. You have to read it from the Catholic perspective in order to criticize it. The Catholic perspective is that anathemas do not say someone is going to hell. The Catholic Church has never put any single person in hell, not even Judas. There is some speculation that he likely is, but the church cannot make that judgment. And so these anathemas certainly cannot make that judgment. The church does not have the authority to judge souls. It only has the ability to make objective doctrinal judgments, not subjective eternal judgments. So now that that is out of the way, let's talk about, there's two in particular that I want to look at. The one that says you must bow and kiss the icons, and then the other one, which is you must not commune with anyone who is an iconoclast. The communing is specifically in the context of communion, of Eucharistic communion. So you cannot take Eucharistic communion with churches that oppose this on part of the theology. The theology we have is correct. They are objectively outside of the ecclesial communion. It's not saying you can't talk to people. That would go against so many other Christian beliefs like evangelization. So it's not saying you can't talk to them. You just can't take Eucharistic communion in those churches that are iconoclast. So I think the real kicker here that I want to end with is if anyone does not salute these images, let him be anathema. Theology here is that there's veneration that's due to saints, relics, images, of the idea of that you are giving them a level of reverence. And then there's worship, latria, that's due to God alone. So for me, the difference between veneration and worship is just so clear. And it got to the point where I felt like Protestants were like not giving bad faith understandings, like they just couldn't believe that we don't worship, and it started to almost feel insulting. Like, do you really think I'm, not worshiping? I mean, it felt insulting. Like, you just don't believe what we're saying. But then I watched this video about how the ancient Greeks didn't have a name for the color blue, and they would often use the word black to describe blue because they didn't have a word for it. And they would use, anything that was blue like the sea, they'd use stormy or these other adjectives, but not the color blue. They would call it black. As time went on, they started to give it a word. And then you start seeing the word blue pop up in all these other different places in the Greek literature. And the point was made that when you have a specific word for something, that you are able to understand it as a unique concept better than before, and that it actually reinforces like this loop in your brain, that you start to see this distinction better. So for the Greeks, once they had the word blue, they started to differentiate it from black because their brain recognized it through the word, through the use of the word itself, through the idea of blue as a concept. And for us, I think we recognize the difference between blue and black quite well. I think just the fact that Catholic theology has language for this, that we have language to make the distinction, maybe allows Catholics to understand the distinction better, because it's like a reinforcement loop of that we see it very clearly. And we as Catholics associate worship with sacrifice, and we understand veneration as something very distinct, sacrifice due to God alone. But veneration is just like giving someone the honor that they're due. So I'm starting to, like, instead of thinking you're just giving a bad faith argument, I'm starting to like try to show a little grace and maybe say maybe they just don't have the language for this, and so they can't see the distinction as clearly as Catholics can. Like I said, the practice here is very much connected to the underlying theology. This is about the incarnation, and they're using the language of practice, but this is very, very deeply connected to the theology. This is not idolatry, is what they're saying. This is not idolatry. This is how the Catholic Church has interpreted this. External expressions disconnected from theology are not infallible. But what is the theological concepts which drive the practices. If practice was distinct from the theology, then the practice would not have infallibility. The theology is infallible. The theology must be correct. It must not be idolatry. I think the criticism comes in where it wasn't a practice, now it is a practice, and so that's a switch. But the theology underlying this has not changed. The theology underneath it, like, it gives rise to different expressions in different historical contexts. So to deny icon veneration in those first centuries was to deny paganism. To deny practice in the later centuries, up in the 7th century, is to deny the incarnation. Either the support or the denial of the practice is so deeply connected to the underlying motivations here. The theology is protected from error here. Then I noticed Protestants really drill in on to bow and to kiss, on the anathema. It's about intent of the heart, and that's what it is in Catholic theology. It's always about the inner disposition driving what you're doing. So to bow and kiss at this time period is how people greeted each other. Right? I've worked with Afghan immigrants, and they always give me kiss, kiss, kiss. Like, right? They give me 3 kisses each cheek. Not a close friend. I was somebody that was helping them sign papers. It's a friendly greeting. And so I think here in the West, we don't have this sort of greeting between people that you barely know, even, much less friends. Like, I don't kiss my friends on the cheek when I see them. We kind of have our individual boundaries, right? So I think we're a little bit don't quite understand the language here. So, I mean, and this is also a Christian tradition, the kissing, like to greet one another with a holy kiss. Like my mom said, growing up, they would have the men on one side and the women on the other side. And then during church service, they would greet each other with a holy kiss. And it's men to men on the lips, women to women on the lips, a kiss. It's a Christian tradition. So while that unsettles your Western sensibilities, let me go find the actual document that talks about the word to bow and kiss, specifically kiss, of why that was used, because we do not have to rely on my side commentary and my cultural ideas to make this case. So we can know with certainty that this was the case because there's the letter of the synod to the emperor and empress, and they say exactly why they used this word. We have likewise decreed that these images are to be reverenced, Greek word, that is, salutations are to be offered to them. The reason for using the word is that it has a twofold signification. This word in the Old Greek tongue signifies both to salute and to kiss. And the preposition gives it the additional idea of strong desire towards the subject, which last word implies salutation, so a greeting, and strong love. For that which one loves, he also reverences, and what he reverences, that he greatly loves, as the everyday custom which we observe towards those we love bears witness, and which both ideas are practically illustrated when two friends meet together. So when we're talking about icon veneration, we're talking about two friends meeting together, okay? Not worship, friends meeting. He talks about this used in the scriptures, but interestingly, he says, it is evident that by greetings here, he means reverence for the Pharisees, being very high-minded and thinking themselves to be righteous, were eager to be reverenced by all, but not merely to be kissed. For to receive salutations of this latter sort savored too much of lowly humility, and this was not to the Pharisees' liking. So not only do we have a familial intimacy, friends greeting each other, that's the kind of reverence we're talking about when we're doing icon veneration. Like they're friends that God allows us to have across time and space. He gives them the ability to receive our words. But not only is it two friends meeting, it's too lowly for the Pharisees, that this was too humble of a greeting for the Pharisees. This is clearly not connected to idolatry. It only works through God's power. So I hope, I didn't have a script for this, so I hope it was clear, but basically I think that theology is solid, is there present from the beginning. When you're assessing practice, you're always simultaneously assessing the underlying theology driving it, and that the church is not protected on historical matters, but it is on the theological ones, and that's where we see the continuity. And then that anathemas are not judging souls to hell. They're not judging souls. They're making objective doctrinal judgments and condemnations, but they're not making eternal condemnations. And so all in all, I think you can take from that we believe the saints are our friends, that we can talk to them, and that we can use icons to remind us of their presence. Any power they have to hear us comes from God in a way that is unknown to us. And that from here, I'm going to be moving more into cultural commentary and kind of putting Catholic theology in context with the greater culture. Apart from Protestantism, I probably will have one or two on Protestantism here in the future, but I kind of just wanted to lay the groundwork of why I'm a Catholic Christian, and now I'll be moving into the greater culture. So thanks for watching.